Afternoon, Awesemo baseball fans. What's going on, everybody? Terry McBride here with Adam Scherer, bringing you the MLB Live Before Lock show. Coming to you a little bit early in the day. We've got a 6:40 lock on a weird slate on DraftKings, 5-gamer on DK, 4-gamer on FanDuel. Before we dive into all of that, we're brought to you by Jock Market today. We've got a great show planned for you. But Adam, what's going on, man? How's your day going?
Pretty good. First time we've done a show together, I think. So pretty excited for that. Nice change of pace. But yeah, today's going well. Nice to have, a 5-game baseball slate and then follow that up with the first regular season NFL game of the season. Should be a pretty fun night.
Yeah, definitely psyched to just have a night loaded with sports watching. My Yankees are playing. I'm going to have the football game on one of the TVs, get some showdown lineups built. We've got a ton of content going up on the site right now. One of the pieces of content that everybody should be looking out for is our new sports betting podcast. We've got Ben Raza and Matt Kajeski. They cover everything in college football betting, take you through all the different conferences, the best bets on the board. It's called Betting You. It's available wherever you guys get podcasts. New episodes come out every Wednesday, so look for that coming out next week. But we've got a ton of content for everything related to the football game tonight. I wrote my optimizers and groups column. I know we've got a ton of different pieces looking at that showdown slate. So hit up the site, a lot of free content up there. And give us a like and subscribe, guys. We've got a ton of stuff going on, a lot of giveaways, a lot of DFS offers. More than that, we've got free MLB player rankings on the site tonight. We've got NFL Showdown single game top plays is free on the site tonight. So get in there, check out some of that free content. Win yourself $1 million in one of the Showdown contests. Should be pretty good. But we've got a ridiculous slate of baseball to talk about. Like you said, this is, I think, our first show we've ever done together, and we got like the worst slate of the year saddled with it. So should be interesting. But just taking a look at anything, like what's your overarching thoughts about just the slate in general? Like how does this slate shape out for you as you're looking at building lineups, and what are your primary focuses on this one?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway for me this morning when I did the show with Josh was just that obviously ownership always plays a big role in baseball because there's so much volatility in the sport. But on a slate like this, it just drives what I do to such a large extent because there's so many spots that are just really, really close where, there's no real, Yu Darvish facing the Angels or anything like that, but you're still going to get typically somewhat concentrated ownership in some spots just because teams project or players project slightly better than others in terms of medium projections. So on slates like this, ownership just drives it even more for me because there's, in terms of projections and range of outcomes, there's not that big of a difference between a lot of these offenses, between a lot of these pitchers. So even more so than normal, it's kind of just like, yeah, okay, whatever we don't think the field's going to go to, I'll go to, and hope that that variance works in my favor, basically.
Yeah. A slate like this, I'm always willing to, I think, embrace a little bit more risk, go to some of the uglier pitchers, and this is an ugly pitching slate to begin with, so it's kind of easy to get there. And I think, is it for you, are you more willing to embrace like alternate constructions a little bit as well, maybe spread out more shares than you normally would to non-standard stack sizes, maybe grabbing like a full and then just a bunch of one-offs, or maybe 2 smaller size stacks with a couple one-offs, things like that you maybe wouldn't consider on a larger slate? Is that part of your process too?
Yeah, larger slates, normally I just run different, 5-man stacks, whether it's 5-3, 5-2. On 5-gamers, I normally mix in some 4-4, 4-3, just to get, a little bit different builds because, again, when you have 20 teams, it's pretty likely that one of them just absolutely smashes. When you have 10 teams, it's obviously not quite as likely. It becomes more likely that, you just have a bunch of like 6-5 games or something like that. And getting a little bit more exposure to different parts of different teams makes a little bit more sense to me.
Yeah, and just still trying to capture a broad range of outcomes throughout those teams, throughout those lineups, and putting different combinations of hitters together. And that also helps differentiate lineups a little bit in that you can get to some more heavily owned players, but if you're putting them together in unique combinations where you're not necessarily grabbing the 3, 4, 5 hitters from the same team like the entire field is when they're stacking lineups, it does give you a little bit of ability to diversify. But like you said, that's very restricted to like smaller slate play like this. You get much more odds of a team running off and hiding with a score, like you were just saying, on a bigger slate. That's something that comes up in Slack a lot, something people ask us about a lot. So all right, taking a look at the board here. Let me make sure I didn't skip any of our plugs here before we move on here. We do have a monster giveaway, guys, for the opening night kickoff game between the Bucs and the Cowboys that we were just talking about before. So if you follow the instructions on the pinned tweet on our Awesemo_com Twitter handle, All you have to do is predict whether Brady or Dak Prescott throws for more yards in tonight's game. One random winner from among the correct guessers wins a free year of Awesemo Plus Platinum, which is $1,000 value. Not a bad price for just guessing the right quarterback and then being drawn at random. This is one of our biggest giveaways all year long. So get on there, hit the Awesemo_com Twitter handle. Make sure you give it a follow so that we know who you are and you're catching all our stuff as it comes out as well. And good luck, guys. Get on that. That's a great giveaway. So we've got first game up, the early one that's on the DK slate, not on the FanDuel slate, unfortunately, because it's got two of the more interesting, I think, pitchers on the board in Marcus Stroman and Jesus Luzardo. We've got the Mets going up against the Marlins. Mets minus 175 favorites with a 4.32 implied total. Home Marlins 3.27 implied run total, 7.5 run total in the game. What are you seeing for this one?
So, yeah, it's unfortunate it's not on the FanDuel slate, but I think Stroman is, and this kind of just speaks to how unusual this slate is. Stroman, I think, is the best combination of talent and matchup that we have. There's another Ranger Suarez, I think, in that conversation as well. But normally Stroman is someone that he's a good real life pitcher, but not a great DFS pitcher. Only has struck out about 21.3% of hitters this year. But on this slate, where pretty much every pitcher we're going to talk about either isn't a very good strikeout pitcher or is in a relatively difficult matchup, you get Stroman going into Miami, facing a Marlins team that strikes out over 25% of the time against right-handed pitching this year, has about an 80 WRC plus against righties, and has a 3.3 implied run total here. So I think Stroman looks really good on this slate. Right now, we have him projected to be the second highest owned pitcher on DraftKings behind Ranger Suarez. I think he looks really good. On the other side, you have Jesus Luzardo, who has been just flat out bad this season, pretty much no matter where he's pitched, whether it's been AAA, been Oakland, been Miami. But he is still a highly regarded pitching prospect. He still has talent. It just hasn't really surfaced much this year. As a starter, he only has a 21.3% strikeout percentage. He's walked 11% of hitters. He's allowed 1.6 home runs per nine, 5.05 xFIP, but he is only $6,700. He is pitching in Miami, which is a favorable park. The Mets have been pretty much average against left-handed pitching this year in terms of strikeouts and in terms of production. So it's not the worst matchup for him. He certainly has a very, very low floor. But for example, this is one of the situations I was talking about. You compare him to Ranger Suarez on DraftKings, who's $700 more expensive. Suarez is getting about double the ownership, and he's got about a 1.25. He's like 1.25 times as likely to be a top two pitcher as Luzardo, according to our top pitchers tool. So it's a situation where, yes, I like Suarez more than I like Luzardo, but I think if you play this slate 1,000 times and, assuming ownership comes in the way we're projecting it, I think that you make money by moving some of that Suarez ownership down to Luzardo, just because the range of outcomes is similar enough. So it's certainly not a spot I'm going to feel good about. Whereas Stroman, I do feel pretty good. Like if I roster Stroman and he has a bad game, I'll be surprised. If I roster Luzardo and he has a bad game, that's kind of something that I expect to happen. But from an ownership standpoint, I still think that there's merit to getting there.
Yeah, when we go to that, to your point, we're kind of embracing that risk, and you're paying for that risk in terms of it by getting a little bit of leverage on the field where you're getting to a much lower on pitcher. He's still going to be in like a quarter of lineups. It's not the sneakiest spot in the world, but it's definitely a much better situation for at least a comparable pitcher on talent. And as they were coming up through their various systems, I think, Luzardo was clearly ahead of Ranger Suarez in terms of prospect profile and pedigree and everything that you would expect. So I still expect Luzardo to come out the better pitcher in the end. It's just, to your point, he's struggled throughout this season. Seems a little bit targetable for sequential hitting, a little bit targetable for power, given his 10.4% barrel rate, 39.2% hard hit with a 14.5 degree average launch angle, 10.8% walks and 21.3% strikeout. But like you were saying, it kind of just makes sense to get to him on that ownership pivot. Speaking of the ownership, though, with about 40% of the field looking at Stroman on the DK slate, around 25% of the field looking at Luzardo on this slate, is this a spot where you're going to consider going to these bats as well and kind of make it a both sides, and maybe attack a little bit of that ownership with some of these bats? Or the Marlins particularly not good enough?
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying, or the Marlins just not good enough to take that approach with them.
Yeah, I mean, the Marlins are the tougher sell of the two. I think if you're playing, 150 max, large field lottery style tournaments, there's still an argument to be made, since Stroman is projected to pull about 38% ownership on DraftKings, and it is only a 5-game slate, so the opportunity cost for bats isn't that high. But that being said, we still have Miami very clearly as the lowest top stack percentage. Colorado is the second lowest with a 6.5% chance of being top stack. Miami's at 3.5%. So pretty wide gap there. They are projected to go a little bit under owned. even at that low top stack percentage. And again, you are negatively correlating with basically 1/3 of the field. So there's a case to be made, but there's definitely teams that, even factoring that in, I have ahead of Miami.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the Mets on the other side is, I assume, just a little bit better team, more talented individual players. Maybe not the best overall version of this lineup that we've ever seen, but still a fairly competent version of the lineup going up against the struggling lefty in Luzardo. Is that a more appealing spot to get to? They don't look over-owned, at least on the back end of the lineup. JD Davis drawing a significant ownership number for his $2,200 salary.
Yeah, I think so, because like you were just saying, even if you just look at the top stack tool, they are projected to basically be owned where they should be in terms of aggregate team ownership. But then if you look a little bit deeper and you look at the individual ownership percentages, JD Davis, I have no idea how he possibly is $2,200, but he's $2,200 batting cleanup here. This is someone that has a lot of power. Since the start of the 2019 season against left-handed pitching, Davis has a 245 expected ISO, 389 expected WOBA. Just absolutely no idea where this price tag came from, but very clearly one of the best values on the slate. He's projected for 20% ownership. That's fine. But you get beyond that, the next highest owned guy on this team is Peter Alonso at 12.5%. Lindor at that same ownership point. Baez at about 10%. Everyone else less than 10. So if you 5-man stack this team, even if you include Davis, you have some ownership, but it's not a crazy amount. It's going to be pretty easy to differentiate elsewhere. If you stack this team without JD Davis, you're already contrarian because such a high percentage of Met stacks are going to have him. So I think that, combined with, like you said when we were talking about Luzardo, yes, he's getting less ownership than Ranger Suarez is, but you still have basically 1/4 of the field putting Jesus Luzardo in their lineup. So you are still negatively correlating with a nice chunk of the field. Whereas when you look at some of these teams that are in better spots and a little bit more popular, like Toronto, for example, yeah, they're a better offense than the Mets, but nobody's rostering Nestor Cortez. So if Toronto does well, that's great if you have them, but you're not getting any extra bump at beating some other teams. Whereas if the Mets do well, 25% of your opponents just lost.
Yeah, and that's a great way to approach a slate like this, particularly on a small slate where you can get that much individual concentration on some of these pitchers. It just helps. It's better to do that. Than attack a somewhat highly owned pitcher where there's still 15, 20 other options on the board that could change the slate. There's so few options in terms of pitching that are going to run off and hide, so few options in terms of overall stacks and overall bats that I think you can definitely get away with that. So I like that approach. As far as getting into the individuals on the Mets, leaving JD Davis and his heavy ownership aside, maybe leaving Pete Alonso and his obvious home run upside aside, are there favorite bats of yours in that lineup? Anybody that you specifically want to make sure you're getting to more shares of than the field within those stacks?
So I think Baez deserves a mention just because Luzardo hasn't really been missing bats this year. Javier Baez has really struggled at the plate, but whenever you get him against someone that doesn't strike out a lot of hitters, and so far this year, Luzardo's only struck out 20.5% of righties while allowing a 228 expected ISO and a 368 expected WOBA. That's pretty appealing to me. You also get a little bit of a lineup bump with Baez hitting third. Unfortunately, no Jonathan VR in the lineup. That makes it a little bit weaker, but Baez I think looks pretty good. Obviously putting aside Alonso and Davis, I think he looks pretty good. Luzardo has been better against lefties, as you would expect. 305 expected WOBA, 149 expected ISO. Not saying if you're stacking, to ignore a $3,400 Conforto or anything like that, but as far as one-offs go, I'm looking more so to the right-handed power.
Yeah, Conforto's been coming on a little bit of late. He's got his WRC plus up to 104, 12 home runs, a 158 ISO at this point in the season. He's been struggling. He's been a tough ask all season, but maybe coming on a little bit, keeping the ownership down, and a lefty-lefty matchup. I do like that in terms of getting to somebody who's maybe a little bit sneaky. Might even come in a little under where we have him projected. I feel like people have just been overrating lefty-lefty all season long. Another guy that I think deserves a mention, just given his low strikeout rate up at the top of the line at 16.8% strikeout rate for Francisco Lindor, just a guy who's putting the ball in play with frequency. He's another guy who's struggled. 95 WRC plus, 155 ISO, and only 13 home runs on the season with a 318 on base. But we know Francisco Lindor is a better player than that. He's still 4,700. That's probably low for him. So I think he's at least worth a mention up at the top of that lineup. And then on the other side, any favorite Marlins bat, if you were going to maybe grab a one-off from this team, or if you were looking to stack anybody that's appealing to you more so than others?
No, it's kind of more so. Obviously, it doesn't always work out in practice, especially if you're playing 150 lineups. But teams like Miami, typically, to me, they're like more appealing as a stack than as one-offs, especially against someone like Stroman. And my thinking there is more so like there's no one hitter on Miami that really stands out in terms of someone that is just, like better than all the hitters around them by a wide margin. Stroman's not the type of pitcher that, he's not like one of these high strikeout pitchers that also gives up, a couple of home runs. He's not Robbie Ray. He's not Scherzer or Cole. So it's the way I kind of think of it is more like if Stroman isn't on top of his game, he does become hittable, but in that case, you would actually just want as many Marlins as you can get because you're getting like the C version of Marcus Stroman. Whereas if Stroman is on top of his game, it's pretty unlikely that, it's really difficult to point to any one of these guys and say like, oh, well, I still think it's a good matchup for him because it's not, They all are kind of bad.
Yeah, it's not a spot where you want to call out like a Jesus Sanchez or somebody like that and just pick the big lefty with a little bit of pop because of that ability of Stroman to keep the ball down, keep the ball generally in the yard. 7.4 degree average launch angle, 6.6% barrel rate, not really playing well the home run upside, home run power. So I think that makes a ton of sense. Looking at the next one, we'll move on from this game. We've got the Royals going into Baltimore. Carlos Hernandez on the hill for Kansas City. John Means going for the Baltimore Orioles. The Orioles are favored minus 114 favorites on a 9-run total, 4.44 implied total for the Royals, 4.66. Pretty close game in terms of the implied totals here. What are you seeing in terms of this one? Do you like either one of these pitchers?
Yeah, I think on DraftKings, where you have to roster 2 pitchers, they're both pretty solid options. The Royals are a difficult team to strike out, only about an 18.8% strikeout percentage against left-handed pitching this year, but not the best offense at 96 WRC plus, 148 ISO against left-handed pitching. So for someone like Means, I think that it does help. It makes him look a little bit better to me because he's been a decent strikeout pitcher this year. 22.9% strikeout percentage on this slate is actually pretty good. Where he's had the most issues is he's allowed 1.8 home runs per 9. And then, he is pitching in Camden Yards, but it's only around 70 degrees here. Camden Yards actually plays a lot more straight up in the fall and the spring. It's the summer that really gets it its reputation for being a favorable hitter's park because it gets really humid and the ball absolutely flies, but it's a little bit cooler today. So I think that works in his favor. He's only struck out about 19% of hitters since coming back from the injured list. I think that's a concern, but his walk numbers are still low, which is good. His expected WOBA allowed is 306 over that time, so it's not like he's getting absolutely lit up. I think at 7,100 on a slate where pitching is pretty dicey, I have no issue getting to him. And then on the other side with Carlos Hernandez, the cheapest pitcher available on DraftKings at 6,300. He has seen a pretty big drop off in his strikeout stuff as a starter. He's struck out 19.1% of hitters as a starter this year. He has a 30.5% strikeout percentage as a reliever. So you may see that strikeout percentage come up a bit, but it's not surprising that you're seeing a drop. And I think that, is something that needs to be accounted for when you're thinking about Hernandez, but he's still done a pretty good job of limiting production. 0.83 home runs per 9 as a starter. 4.73 xFIP is a little elevated, but nothing crazy. And again, he's only 6,300. So on a lot of slates, I wouldn't be that interested here. But as is, I think he's getting the ownership he deserves. We have him with a 21% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. He's getting 22% ownership. He's in that same ballpark with Luzardo and with Means. I don't think there's a really big difference between these guys. So as is, I would kind of just expect to be doing what we have the field projected to do and just be coming in, right around the field on those guys.
Yeah, those are guys that don't necessarily stand out for me in terms of wanting to get to them for any particular reason, but they're both on the board on this slate, which kind of just qualifies them to make my lineups on this one anyway. There's very few guys that I'm just considering taking off the board entirely. So even begrudgingly, I'll be getting to shares of these guys. I'm not sure if I would go all the way up to the fields mark on FanDuel on either pitcher, just for a little bit of lack of trust. I think very little of John Means in terms of when he's successful. A lot of it's just based on really, really low BABIPs. Like earlier in the season during his successful run, he had like a 175 BABIP, some of which is skill. It's a skill to induce ground balls and get balls hit toward fielders, of course, but some of that was a lot of luck and happenstance. And I just tend to think he's a really, really lucky pitcher who benefits from a lot of luck and upside. But I think he's valuable here.
No, it's funny you mentioned that because I was actually kind of trying to dig in a little bit earlier to his numbers since he came back from the injured list. And so to try and get a baseline, I looked, he has a 245 career BABIP.
Yeah. It's every single season. It has been very, very low. It was like 218 or something like that. 216 last year, 256 in 2019.
Probably in part too, because he gives up a lot of home runs, which like will drive it down. But it's still kind of crazy. Because I mean, we're at 321 major league innings now, which is a pretty decent amount, and a 245 BABIP. Like you kind of have to assume it comes up at least somewhat, even if it stays below average.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was saying, there is some skill involved in being able to induce balls in a certain way, but it's not going to be to that degree. So I think there's a lot of luck baked in for him. So, I'll probably end up below the field a little bit, but I don't think it would be extreme on either side here. Just looking at Hernandez, too, you get the bump from going up against the Orioles, 25% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching over the course of the season. Maybe he finds a couple bonus ones there, but yeah, we definitely do have to account for the fact that he can't exert himself quite like he is as a coming out of the pen when he's making starts. So the numbers naturally come down a little bit. Makes sense. Anything for you here in terms of the bats? You're looking to stack up these teams and attack some of that mid-range ownership on this slate?
Yeah, so we have seen Kansas City's ownership come up since this morning. I think that was to be expected. Salvador Perez is pretty clearly the best catcher whenever he's playing at this point, just having an absolutely insane year. Yeah, he's 6,100 on DraftKings, but still projected for 30% ownership. Adalberto Mondesi, pretty mispriced when he has third base and shortstop eligibility, 4,500. He's pulling 22% ownership. Merrifield's at 16%. And then you get the cheap guys like Alberto and Dozier, both north of 10% too. So Kansas City, even though I think it is a perfectly fine spot for them because Means does give up power, the strikeout numbers haven't been as good since the injury. They're so cheap and pulling enough ownership where I would anticipate not getting quite as much of the field on those guys, even though I do think that, players like Mondesi and Perez are very good plays. On the other side with Baltimore, I think they're a little bit more appealing. They actually are the favorites here. Like I said before, Hernandez, he hasn't been bad in terms of limiting runs so far as a starter, but the strikeouts are down. And Baltimore is kind of similar to the Mets when you look individually at their projected ownership. Cedric Mullins, 4,700, pulling 20% on DraftKings. Think he's a very good play. But then the next highest owned guy is Santander at 12%, Stewart at 11%, everyone else 10% or lower. So it's a little bit lower owned total lineup. You do have Trey Mancini back, which makes the lineup deeper, gives you more options, but also on DraftKings makes it so you can't stack 1 through 5 because Mountcastle and Mancini are the same position. But either way, you can split your exposure between those guys. They're both reasonably priced. I think looking at the ownership, I'm actually a little bit more interested in going to Baltimore than Kansas City, even though we do have Kansas City with a slightly higher chance of being the top stack tonight.
Yeah, and a little bit different situation, it looks like, on the FanDuel slate in terms of Baltimore here, just pulling a little bit more. You got the top 5 hitters all in double-digit ownership. Not tragic. Cedric Mullins up over 25% is extreme, but everybody else under 20, over 10. You do get multi-position on both Mountcastle and Mancini at first base and outfield over there. You also have the flex position, so you can move guys around, combine them in different ways. And then you get 2 more multi-position guys at the end of the lineup in Jorge Mateo and Jahmani Jones. So there's just different ways that you can put this lineup together and kind of offset some of those ownership concerns in the top end of the lineup. So yeah, I do like going after both of these pitchers a little bit with bats. I like the appeal of guys in the middle of that Royals lineup like Andrew Benintendi, Carlos Santana, who are both pulling single-digit ownership on both sites. I think those guys can help you offset some of the weight that's going on Sal, that's going on Adalberto Mondesi, and some of these other hitters. But those guys in particular, Benintendi's been a 2020 guy once in the past and has that ability still if he can stay on the field. 13 home runs, 8 stolen bases this season. Carlos Santana is a guy who's hit 34 home runs twice in his career, been over 20 several times, 19 homers, a 147 ISO on the season, though, and loses a lot of his power as a righty bat against a lefty. He's a switch hitter. So you do get the power drain there for him. But with nobody on those guys, I think they're at least somewhat appealing in that stack. Outside of that, anything else from this game before we move on, hit another plug?
No, I think that's it.
Cool. So it looks like, let's see what we have to talk about now, guys. Football. We talked about football being back. Football is finally back, and we've got a deal to get you started on your NFL DFS career. Get Awesemo Plus NFL Express Weekly Pass for only $1. $1 buys you the Express Pass with the promo code DAK, D-A-K. Our Express Pass is the best way to introduce yourself to Awesemo Plus NFL, which is more expansive than ever. Included is access to our player and ownership rankings, our expert Slack chat where me and Adam and all the other guys hang out and answer questions and talk shop all day long. It includes everything that we have to offer for showdown and single game contests, so you're getting the actual projections, the ownership projections for all the showdown and single game stuff. New this year in the package, our season-long fantasy football product as well. So we're covering all the projected ownership, optimal lineup probabilities for tiers contests on DraftKings in there. Promo code DAK gets you in. Highest ever value that we provided on the NFL Express Weekly Pass, $1. It's valid through Monday, September 13th, this coming Monday. If you're a new member looking for more than just an Express Pass, use promo code MLB Live before lock at checkout. Get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum which gives you full access to everything that we cover, all the different sports, all the full projections, every single tool, everything that we touch. You find both of those links pinned in the YouTube chat or in the video description below, guys. While you're at it, hit the thumbs up, give us a little nudge. This is our first show together. I think we're doing a pretty good job here. If anything's been clunky, it's been my hosting. Adam's been crushing it. So give him a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button so you know when everything comes out. And we're going to move on to the next game. We've got the Rockies with Antonio Sensatella on the hill with going up against the Phillies. You mentioned Ranger Suarez, another pitcher that I found appealing while I was looking at it as well. 8.5 overall run total in this game. Phillies heavy favorites, -181, 3.66 implied total for the Rockies, 4.94 implied total for the Phils. What are we liking here? Is it just heavy all about Ranger Suarez?
Yeah, it's a lot of Ranger Suarez here. I think that, so like I was saying earlier when we talked about, I don't even remember who we were talking about. Oh, we were talking about Stroman. Or talking about the slate in general. I think Suarez is pulling a little bit more ownership than he should in terms of his chances of success versus other options on the slate. But that's not to say I don't think Ranger Suarez is the best of these, mid-range, cheap, like value pitchers on DraftKings, because he does have a very good matchup here against Colorado. They have a 70 WRC plus outside of Coors Field this year. Their strikeout percentage jumps like 7 points. I mentioned it to Josh this morning, but I actually found it really interesting watching a Rockies game the other day, because we've kind of, talked about or assumed that part of the reason the Rockies are always so bad outside of Coors Field is that they get used to, pitches not moving, and then you leave and everything's different. And Ryan Spilborghs, who played for the Rockies a lot, said exactly that. He was talking about Larry Walker's Hall of Fame candidacy, and he was saying that it kind of pisses him off when Rockies players get dinged for playing in Coors Field, because he's like, you don't realize how hard it is to play when you leave Coors Field, because you spend 2 weeks there in the altitude, none of the breaking pitches move, and then you leave and everything is like the nastiest pitch you've ever seen. So it was kind of interesting to have that reaffirmed. But you have Colorado now with a 3.4 implied run total. It's a favorable park for hitting, but again, here in Philly, it looks like the weather's pretty cool. That should help the pitchers a bit. Suarez, since joining the starting rotation, has a 23.1% strikeout percentage. He's been lucky. He's going to regress to some extent. He hasn't allowed a home run yet. 85% left on base percentage is higher than it's going to be going forward, but 3.79 xFIP is good. Again, the 23% strikeout percentage is good. Walk rate's elevated at 11.5%, but so far, expected WOBA has been good. His numbers for the most part have been good. And at 7,400, it's not like we're getting him at a 9K price tag or something, and he's priced to keep doing what he's been doing. He can regress a bit and still be worth a $7,400 price tag easily. And then you get a good matchup here against Colorado on top of that. So really like Suarez. And the only negative thing I would say is pay attention to what the rest of your lineup looks like. If you are going to a team like Kansas City that has, quite a bit of ownership going to it, or if you're using JD Davis, someone like that, then yeah, you should probably be inclined to take a chance on, obviously, like not if you're using Davis, but like Luzardo or someone like that, one of these lower owned options. But if you are going to a lower owned stack, feel free to use Suarez here, because I think he is in a really good spot.
Yeah, and it's a slate where with some of these chalky pitchers, you're just going to have to kind of eat the chalk, particularly where you've got a roster 2 of them. So like you said, just make sure that you're differentiating with those bats, getting a little bit further afield with the bats. Any love for Sensatella in this one? Any use for him at all? 2.3% ownership projection at 6,800 on the DK slate, or is he just going to get crushed here?
It's pretty tough for me. Crunching lineups, started to crunch lineups right now while we were talking. And, on the one hand, there's only 3 pitchers on this slate on DraftKings that are projected for less than 10% ownership. So in larger field tournaments, that's really the case that I guess you would make for Sensatella. That, and he's actually, I don't think he's a terrible pitcher in terms of run prevention. I think he's a very bad DFS pitcher because he doesn't strike guys out. But, that would be the case. But even so, in my initial crunch now, I'm barely getting any. I think it's just a spot where I end up looking elsewhere. If I were to roll the dice on low-owned pitchers, it doesn't look like it's going to be him. So, pretty tough sell for me, just because even on a slate where there's not a lot of strikeout upside, you're talking about someone with a 16% strikeout percentage this year.
Yeah, it's just very, very difficult to see him putting up any kind of significant score, even if the other guys go pop. I mean, he could get a pitch by a bullpen pitcher at this rate, so God knows he's just not a big-time strikeout guy. But you're right. I mean, in terms of the run creation allowed, the walks are fine, the barrel rate is fine, so there's nothing really to nitpick on with him. We just, he's kind of just a meh kind of a pitcher in terms of DFS upside. Is that going to walk you into any of the Phillies bats here, just by this is a pitcher that you're not going to really have in any lineups? Does that inflate your ownership shares on the Phillies, who actually look fairly low owned on the DK slate outside of Bryce Harper? Very different story on FanDuel with 3 hitters in that lineup over 20%, and then Odubel at 17. Is that a play for you on DK going to Phillies bats?
Yeah, I mean, right now we have them as a team projected to be the most under-owned team on the slate. And like we were saying, Senzatella is not bad at limiting power, but you're still talking about someone that has a 16% strikeout percentage pitching in Philadelphia against a lineup that does have plenty of power. No JT Realmuto today makes the lineup a bit weaker. Someone else is missing too, I think, but maybe it's just Hoskins. But the lineup is, a little bit weaker than normal. But at the same time, Brad Miller still has power. He's batting fourth, so that's a pretty cheap option there. I think one reason that you're not seeing a lot of ownership go here is that they are expensive. Harper is at 6,300. Herrera and Segura are both 5,100. Then you start to get some savings after them. But that main 1 through 3 is really expensive. But the other thing that I noticed is that the implied run totals on a lot of these teams have really fallen since this morning. We had the Braves at 6.1. Now they're at 5.5. The Yankees have gone from like 4.9 to 4.4. The Jays have gone from like 4.7 to 4.2. Phillies are still coming in with a 4.7 implied run total, which from what I'm looking at right now is the second highest on the slate behind Atlanta. So you have this team that is facing a pitcher that's going to let them hit the ball. They have plenty of power in their lineup. They're not getting much ownership. I think they look good to me on DraftKings.
Yeah, it's a targetable spot for me. I like the idea that you get two hitters off the top with Odubel and Gene Segura, who both strike out significantly less than 20% of the time. So they're putting bat on ball against a guy who's allowing bat on ball. It just makes a lot of sense that there's going to be some sequential hitting, some run creation opportunities. Those two guys leading into Bryce Harper, Brad Miller, who's 49.7% hard hit rate for Brad Miller this season with a 12.3% barrel rate, 17 home runs, and a 234 ISO. Where did that come from? That's a surprising amount of upside from Brad Miller, and he's still 2,500 on the FanDuel slate, 4,000 on the DK slate, cleaning up with single-digit ownership on the DK slate. I think that's a mistake by the field. McCutchen and Didi look good in this spot at single-digit ownership, so I really like this Phillies team here. And the Didi play, actually mentioning him, he was one of the prop bets that I flagged today. He's our leader on the bets board, the player props tool, in terms of the best bet on the board. Didi Gregorius to hit a home run, plus 600 with an 18% probability of hitting and a 25% ROI. What do you think of Didi getting a home run here?
Yeah, seems fine to me.
Sure, why not?
Favorable park, why not?
Yep, that's kind of my read there. Another one that I had flagged, actually, we talked about the pitcher already, but I'll just pull it up on my board since it was our top pitching bet of the day. Marcus Stroman, who we talked about not really being a strikeout pitcher, over 4.5 strikeouts. Comes in as a minus 137 play with a 73% probability of hitting, 26% expected ROI on that one. Taking a look at my board, I've got Stroman going well over that. I've got him over 5. So I like that. I like that bet for the Stroman strikeout total. You think Marcus Stroman gets over 4.5 strikeouts?
Yeah, I like the over on that. Just so many strikeouts in the Miami lineup. And it's not like Stroman is a bad strikeout pitcher. He's just, slightly below average. He can definitely get his against the lineup like Miami. Plus he gets the pitcher spot as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like both of those spots. Excellent. Going through back over to this game here that we were just talking about. Any love for any of the Rockies bats on the other side of that one going up against Suarez with that gigantic ownership share on him? They're a little bit potentially sneaky given how they've been all season long to me against left-handed pitching in their active rosters, just aggregate numbers. Are you seeing any appeal to getting them to the actual lineup today?
Yeah, larger field tournaments. Like I think I would get to the Rockies before I get to Miami. Again, they basically have twice the top stack percentage as Miami, even though they have the second lowest top stack percentage on the slate. Only 4.5% aggregate ownership. The only hitters, wrong team. Nobody in the lineup is projected for more than Trevor Story's 8.8% ownership on DraftKings. So, if you're stacking Colorado, you kind of can just do whatever you want with the rest of your lineup. But then also it adds value because if Suarez is going to be somewhere around 40% owned and the Rockies do well, 40% of the field just lost if they do well. So it's a low probability. It's unlikely they do well, but when they do, you're suddenly competing with 60% of the field instead of 100%. So, right off the bat, you're competing with 60%, and then you whittle that down based on exactly how well the Rockies do. So I think from that standpoint, they look good. And then also from just like an aggregate ownership standpoint, there's not a lot of under-owned teams right now on DraftKings. We mentioned the Mets basically where they should be, the Phillies under-owned, but none of the teams you really want to get to are going low owned. So not to say you can't stack them and you should just be jamming in the Rockies, but it does just kind of make them look a little bit better when you consider everything.
Yeah, and I think also just taking a look at their pricing I think they're a little bit low owned just for the general value involved in their pricing. A couple guys at the minimum at the back end of the lineup, and Colton Welker and Jonathan Daza. I mean, you're not talking about any of the best players in the world here, but just being able to build in min pricing with low ownership on a slate like this, I think has a little bit of value. And then you get some quality hitters around them. You get Sam Hilliard at the very end of the lineup with a significant amount of power, 14.4% barrel rate in a small sample from the left side of the plate. Kind of an interesting spot, lefty-lefty. And then the top end of the lineup, you wrap it into that. I think there's different ways to put this team together that are going to be unique, low cost, and let you get to basically anything else you want. And like you said, when you go to this team, you can put them together with basically anything since they're so low owned. So I think it's at least an interesting spot. Speaking of interesting things, before we move on to the next game, today's show sponsored by Jock Market. You guys have heard us talk about them a lot, but if this is your first time tuning in and you haven't heard of Jock Market, they turned fantasy sports into a stock exchange. Forget about waiting to the end of the game to make money. Jock Market allows you to buy and sell shares of players in real time for real money with guaranteed payouts for all shares at the end of each night. With daily markets for NBA, MLB, NHL, and PGA, you can make real money every hour, every minute, every second of any match or any game. Use the pregame IPO, pick up shares of your favorite players, and then you buy, you sell, or you'll hold them during the game based on your analysis, based on the game flow, based on what you know from being a subscriber at Awesemo. If you download the app and get started, use our exclusive promo code, that's Awesemo, spelled like it is on the site, for up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. It's an exclusive offer only for the Awesemo community. Make sure to take advantage of it when you download the app. That's Awesemo, gets you a $50 bonus. Pretty straightforward, guys. Go take advantage of that one. Coming into New York, in the Bronx, Jose Berrios on the hill for the Blue Jays, taking on Nestor Cortes and my Yankees. Pretty tight total here, 8.5 total with Yanks slightly favored. What are we seeing here? I think this is obviously a spot for some Jose Berrios shares. What about Nestor Cortes? Any love for him?
Yeah, I think if I'm going to one of those sub 10% owned pitchers, Cortez is the guy that I would get to first. I've talked about him before, kind of not totally buying into him as a starting pitcher, but so far, he has been pretty good. You've seen the strikeout percentage coming up, 22.3% strikeout percentage for Cortes as a starter. He has an elevated 4.87 xFIP, but he's only allowed like a 262 expected WOBA as a starter. So seems like the quality of contact has been, favorable for him. He's getting enough strikeouts, not walking a lot of guys. The matchup against Toronto is the biggest issue here. It's not only a really dangerous offense, but also an offense that doesn't strike out a lot. The argument in favor of Cortes, though, is simply that when you look at his chances of success, like you look at the sub 10% owned pitchers, you have Eric Fetty at 11%, you have Senzatella at 7.5% chances of being a top 2 pitcher. Cortes is coming in at 18%. We have him with basically the same chances as John Means, not far behind guys like Luzardo and Hernandez. Those guys are all getting 20+% ownership. Cortes is projected for 4%. So it's not like you need tons and tons of Cortes to take a stand on him. But if you're going to some more popular bats and you need to differentiate your lineup, Cortes isn't any less talented than guys like Means and Luzardo and Hernandez, at least not in his current form. Maybe in the future, Luzardo ends up being very, very good. But right now, from just a talent standpoint, you can't tell me that you feel any better about these guys than you do Cortes. It's purely that the matchup is really difficult. But, when you actually think in terms of probabilities, the chances that Cortes has a good start against the Blue Jays, even though they're low, it's probably a lot better than you actually think at first glance, because I think the tendency is just to be like, oh, it's the Blue Jays, no chance. But even 20, if there's, a 15 to 20% chance, given his ownership, that's still really good on this particular slate.
Yeah, to me, it's one of the leverage spots that, kind of stood out a little bit. I'm with you. I don't think he's necessarily as talented as what we've seen so far through this season. He's had some issues with home runs, definitely pulling some home run upside for the Blue Jays on the other side of this contest. But with nobody on him at the price, it's not like he's priced up or anything. So, yeah, I think it makes sense to get well over the field on him. And it's a low confidence play, but this is a slate full of low confidence plays. To me, the guy on the other side, Jose Berrios, is the only really proven asset in terms of a pitcher on this slate at all. So if you're not going to him, and he's kind of low owned too, so if you're not going to him, then there really is no safety in any one of these selections. So you might as well go to Nestor Cortes. To your point, he's very similar in terms of the profile, in terms of the overall upside, as a lot of these other clunky pitchers. So I like that call. What about Berrios? Any love for him on going up against the Yanks here?
Yeah, from a talent standpoint, I think he's just a little bit too low owned. Again, he's in that same group. He has a 24.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. Huascar Ynoa is at 25%. Suarez is at 25.9. Stroman leads the slate at just shy of 29%. So not like you have any big gap there. Basically, Stroman, 1.2 times is likely to be the top pitcher as Berrios, give or take. But Stroman's getting like 3 times the ownership. From a talent standpoint, Berrios and Stroman have been very, very similar this year. 3.62 xFIP for Berrios, 3.65 for Stroman, 6.1% walk percentage for both. Berrios 25.8% strikeout percentage to Stroman's 21.3%. So in equal matchups, you'd be giving the edge to Berrios over Stroman because of the strikeouts. Here, yeah, he's got a more dangerous matchup against the Yankees, compared to the Marlins, no question. But the ceiling is just as high for him, and he's getting 1/3 the ownership. So I really do like him as a low owned tournament option. Cortez, it's more so like, if I have to bite the bullet and save some ownership here, I guess I'll hope for the best. Berrios, if I see him in a lot of lineups, I'm going to be pretty happy about it.
Yeah, I was surprised at how low we've got him projected ownership wise. It's not like he's crazy expensive. 9,100 is certainly affordable on this slate. 92 on the DK slate, certainly affordable. So yeah, I think that's a mistake by the field if he comes in that low, and that's something I would want to exploit going up against my heavy strikeout Yankees, who have all their struggles and not the greatest version of this lineup. I was saying it in the YouTube chat yesterday, and it continues to be true. Aaron Boone does not know how to put a lineup together. Brett Gardner leading off is just a disaster. Dude's got a 330 on base, fine, but you don't just put the fast guy in the leadoff spot these days, Aaron Boone. So what do you think of this Yankees lineup? There are several guys in here who I don't necessarily want to get to, but there is still the quality through the middle. And then talk to me about the Blue Jays. I like them top to bottom.
Yeah, I would like the Yankees more if Berrios were projected for more ownership. But as is right now, I kind of just think there's a bigger edge in going to Berrios than there is in going to the Yankees. Not to say the Yankees can't do well, but it is, I think, the most talented pitcher on the slate. At least, you could make a case for Stroman, but I think Berrios is a better pitcher. So you're kind of attacking a spot that is really difficult, and you're not getting a whole lot of negative correlation with the field. But still, Joe Gallo at 12%, Judge at 12%, Rizzo 10%. Those guys are still fine. You mentioned Gardner leading off. I said that was a reason that I liked Alek Manoah even more yesterday, and then Gardner hit a 3-run home run off him and ruined his start. So, but yeah, Brett Gardner should never be leading off. It makes it better for Berrios, even if he homers again. It's still, you would just rather have Gardner there than LeMahieu, who's not even in the lineup. So you take that low K guy out of the lineup. So the Yankees, I think, are fine, but their top stack percentage, they have a 9.9% chance of being the top stack, 10.1% aggregate ownership, just basically coming in around where they should be. On the other side, I think it is a better spot for Toronto. Like I said, Cortez has had success so far. We'll see, we'll see how he looks going forward. But so far, he has been pretty good at limiting production against him. He's been decent at getting strikeouts. Toronto does have the second highest top stack percentage on the slate right now, though, going a little bit over-owned, but I think a lineup where it's a little bit easier to like who you're getting to than the Yankees as well. Because as you go down the lineup, you still have power. When you have Alejandro Kirk at catcher, you have Gurriel, you have Grichuk, you have Danny Jansen as a cheaper catcher. So there are, a lot of bats you can get to, a lot of ways you can differentiate. The one issue would be that everyone in this lineup, with the exception of Smith, Gurriel, and Jansen, is projected for at least 10% ownership. Semien, Guerrero, Hernandez, Bichette, all north of 16%. So they are getting quite a bit of ownership, but I do think that, as usual, they're one of the highest upside offenses.
Yeah, just a very good team. So a team that I'm always happy to get to, but you're right. A little bit of negative leverage on the DK slate, according to the top stacks. Squeaking by last time I reloaded the page anyway, with a little bit of positive on the FanDuel slate, but they're going to be owned on both sites. It's a pretty obvious spot. But yeah, I like getting to this team up and down. I think there's some power upside there. So we can talk about that, and we can, I think we covered everything in this one, right? Nothing. Would you get any? Do you have any love on the back end of the Yankees lineup, by the way, with Tyler Wade and Gio Urshela down there? It's really, to me, like a 5-man lineup in the middle, which I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as the guys that I really want, it's Judge, Rizzo, Stanton, Torres, Gallo, Sanchez. If I need to mix in some Gardner, Wade, or Urshela, fine, but none of that, especially against Berrios, is stuff that I'm going to be excited about.
Yeah, and it just concerns me about their ability to turn that lineup over too. But we've got one more game to talk about, and we're a little short on time, so we'll hop over to that one. We've got the Nationals with Eric Fede on the hill taking on the Braves. We've mentioned Huascar Ynoa a little bit, one of the top pitchers on the board today. What are you liking in this one?
I like Ynoa. He's he's pulling ownership, but he's in that same ownership range as Luzardo and Hernandez and Means at 28%. He actually leads the slate in strikeout percentage this year at 26.8%, 3.45 xFIP. He's having a very good year for Atlanta. The Nats, their active roster for the season only has an 89 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They've actually been slightly above average overall since the trade deadline, which was surprising to me. And, I don't know if it'll hold or not, but they have a 104 WRC plus. The thing that I'm more interested in is that their strikeout percentage over that time is only 20.6%. So they actually have been doing a good job of putting the ball in play. And that's something that stabilizes a bit faster than production. So it probably is a team that isn't going to strike out a ton going forward. But all of that said, 3.7 implied run total for the Nats. Noah reasonably priced. He's a bit less expensive than Barrios and Stroman. I think he's a very good option here, especially because he's not pulling quite as much ownership as Stroman or Suarez.
Yeah, I think it's just a strong spot guy who's been pitching well. And like you said, the highest strikeout rate available on the slate. But you do run him into a few hitters, to your point. Alcides Escobar, 15.2% strikeouts on the season. Spectacular Juan Soto with his 14.7 and a 20.9% walk rate is absurd. Josh Bell under 20% strikeouts. Bunch of guys under the 20% mark in this lineup. So not necessarily a pushover in terms of finding strikeout upside, but definitely a little bit of safety there in terms of run creation, probably. So he's more likely, I think, to get through clean. Any love for Eric Fede at all on this one? He's another very extremely low-owned pitcher on both sides.
Yeah, pretty tough sell there. I mean, if I had to go between Fede or Senzatella, I would go to Fede because I think he is the better pitcher. He has a little bit more strikeout upside, I think. Overall, he's got a 21.2% strikeout percentage this year, 4.14 xFIP. He's not a terrible pitcher. And against righties, he does have a 24.2% strikeout percentage for the season. The issue and the reason that I think it's a pretty, not that being a risky option should just deter you from rostering someone, especially on a slate like this, but he has had issues with right-handed power, and you do have a lot of that in this Atlanta lineup. I mentioned the strikeout percentage against righties, but also a 195 expected ISO, 337 expected WOBA. When you're running into a lineup that has Soler, Riley, Duvall, Swanson, and then from the left side, Albies and Freeman and Peterson, certainly not pushovers. So it's a really dangerous spot for Fede. I think the case in his favor would be that the Braves are getting a lot of ownership, and if he pitches well, then almost 20% of the field is taking some zeros on their hitters, but not getting to a whole lot of him. Again, if I'm going cheap, or not if I'm going cheap, if I'm going low owned, I would try and get Cortez ahead of Fede just because I think he's a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I would much rather go that route and maybe avoid these Braves and their 4.76% home run rate against right-handed pitching, which is the third highest against either hand in the entire league. So just a deadly powerful lineup, 198 collective ISO on the season. Just don't like throwing pitchers into them if I can avoid it. That said, are we getting to Braves bats with all that crazy ownership on them, or are you taking a look at any of the Nationals bats, maybe a little sneaky on the other side with that contact profile?
Yeah, I mean, the Braves are tough because I think that they're my favorite offense, but they're probably everybody's favorite offense. So it's not saying, that you can't go to these guys. You just have to be very aware of what else you're doing with your lineup. Pair them with some low-owned hitters, pair them with low-owned pitching. Just do something so that you're not just, overlapping with 15 to 20% of the field, because, you really have to think in terms of, if this team that I stacked does well, what position does that put me in? And if all you've done is just play the Braves and then play, your other favorite plays, you're just in a position where it's like, okay, cool, they did well. Now I'm still competing with 15% of the field that also played their favorite plays. Whereas you need to do something to just give yourself an angle to pass those teams. So you can still get there. It's not like they're pulling, 50% ownership or anything like that. It's not like these Coors Field slates we've seen recently, but just pay attention to who else you're mixing into these lineups. Another way you can do it is, using 2-mans and 3-mans, and then, pairing it with a different 5-man. It puts you in a situation where you're kind of assuming that Eric Fede / the Mets bullpen is going to give up a couple of home runs, but maybe they don't get lit up. Maybe they give up, 2 home runs, but they only give up 5 runs. Happen to hit those 2 home runs from Atlanta. By having that 2-man stack or that 3-man stack, you still have a leg up on the full Atlanta stacks that have a couple of guys that scored 2 points.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And we talked about that at the start of the show, just, on a smaller slate, being able to do things with alternate constructions like that. So this is probably a great example of that. And then you're just looking at a loaded middle of this lineup from Soler, Freeman, Riley, Duvall, Peterson, and Swanson. Average hard hit rate for those 5 guys, 44.9%. Average barrel rate, 12.1%. That's just a loaded core in this lineup. Dansby Swanson, one of the more underrated shortstops in the game for my money. I love the power in that kid's bat. So I like getting to this team as much as you can. He's only 10% owned. You can put him together with some unique constructions there. On the other side of this one, I assume it's just around the core of like Soto, Bell, maybe a little Yadiel Hernandez. Anybody else in that lineup that's appealing at all for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only guys you're going to feel remotely good about are Soto and Bell. That is typically how Washington plays out, but they are not getting much ownership as a team. It is getting enough ownership that, again, if I'm trying to negatively correlate with the field, I think get to Washington a little bit quicker than I would get to Miami, just because they're at least a like functional offense, whereas Miami basically isn't. So full stacks, I think, are fine, but individually Soto and Bell are the guys that clearly stand out as usual.
Absolutely. So I think that takes us through. Anything else from this game before we close out with a couple plugs here?
No, I think that's it.
Right on. I think we took it top to bottom there. We missed out on questions, but we do have a little short on time, guys. So anything out there, hit us up in Slack. We got a few minutes up until lock. I'll be around. We've also got a couple YouTube channels we need you guys to subscribe to. If you love what we do for DFS, you're going to love what we do on season-long fantasy football and sports betting. So make sure you check those out. Give us a like and subscribe down the bottom so everybody knows how good this combo was. Maybe they put us together again in the future. And we've got some upcoming shows for you coming up at 6:30. NFL Showdown Deeper Dive, Lofty hosting with Alex and Ben. 7:30 right after that, NFL Showdown live before lock. First NFL shows of the year. That one's Greg and Matt. Should be good stuff, guys. Make sure you tune in, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks.